Nice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, in connection din doon, dahil more than one time sinight sa position paper ng mga opisyal ng Office of the Vice President yung Calida versus Trillanes noong 2019. Mr. Chair, it is very disappointing for public officials representing the second highest office sa bansa natin na chine-cherry pick ang mga desisyon ng Supreme Court. Mr. Chair, in addition sa nabanggit ng colleague natin, kaya naman tayo umabot sa subpoena ad testificandum at hindi na lamang simpleng imbitasyon kasi yung mga input na gusto nating makuha mula sa mga opisyal na pangalanan ay crucial na mga impormasyon at hindi na lamang optional or add-on na mga impormasyon in line with the topics of our investigation or inquiry. Tsaka Mr. Chair, hindi nila sinight na actually yung petisyon nung nag-file versus kung sino yung dapat sumagot. Mr. Chair, this Supreme Court petition was actually dismissed. Ibig sabihin, nag-favor yung Supreme Court doon sa kapangyarihan ng legislative bodies na mag-conduct talaga ng mga investigations in line with the legislation. Lalo na yung national budget ay isa yan sa pinagdedebatihan talaga ng mga batas dito sa ating bansa. And Mr. Chair, sa position paper kasi ang dami talagang palusot pero hindi pa maayos yung mga palusot na binibigay. At actually, lalo lang na ina-undermine at hindi nire-respeto yung trabaho ng mga mambabatas, kinukasyon na hindi ito in aid of legislation, wala daw jurisdiction yung committee, nasa Supreme Court na daw. Pero then again, maging yung Supreme Court, kinikilala nga yung ating responsibilidad. Kasi we owe it to the people na talakayin yung ganito mga topic, lalo na at pera ng bayan nyo nakataya. And also, Mr. Chair, yung dinahilan din kasi daw natanggap yung letter, holiday, tapos may weekend pa, kaya late daw nabasa. Mr. Chair, we would like to remind these officials na dahil mga public official tayo, hindi dapat basta-basta ginagamit yung holiday or weekend bilang dahilan para i-neglect yung ating duty. Kasi tayo we have a standard, sapat yung minimum 3 calendar days for us to issue notices kapag magkakahiring tayo. So yun lang gusto nating reiterate, Mr. Chair, in support din sa mga nabanggit dahil sobra na itong actually nasa extent na rin po ng pagbabastos na sa mandato ng committee natin to conduct this investigation. Yun lang, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Congressman Nabante.
tayo po ay nagpapasalamat kay Atty. Powa na yung ating pag-imbita sa kanya, palagi siya nandirito, no? The fact that he worked as a spokesman of the Vice President before. Gusto ko lang tanungin sa kanya, kilala niya yung mga taon to. Ito ba talaga mga ugali nito mga taon to? Palagay mo, Tony Chua, ito ba talaga ugali ng mga taong ito?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Your Honor,
Attorney Powa, you recognize.
I hope you would forgive me, but I cannot comment po on that. No? But I'm sorry po.
Well, I'm just so glad, Mr. Chair, that Atty. Powa do not have this kind of an attitude also. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Mr.
Congressman Luistro.
Mr. Chair, to complete the arguments, our answer to the arguments which were raised by the OVP in their position paper, I wish to share the rules and the jurisprudence which were cited with respect to the argument on sub judice rule. Isa po sa mga dahilan na ginagamit ng OVP why they refuse to attend our inquiry in aid of legislation is the rule on sub judice. By this, we are prevented from making any comment or disclosures pertaining to judicial proceeding which may directly or indirectly impede, obstruct, or degrade the administration of justice. In Filipino, Mr. Chair, kapag ang subject matter is already pending in court, generally, we are precluded from making any comment. However, Mr. Chair, maliwanag po ang parameters when the sub judice rule may apply. And I wish to share, number 1, under Section 1 of the Rules on Inquiry in Aid of Legislation, the filing or pendency of a case before any court tribunal, or quasi-judicial or administrative body shall not stop or abate any inquiry conducted to carry out a legislative process. Number two, Mr. Chair, there is no pending court case or administrative appeal that involves the same subject matter of this hearing. I understand that there are pending petitions before the Supreme Court, but let us acknowledge that the subject matter of those petitions is the constitutionality of the grant of confidential fund to executive offices like the OVP and the DepEd. Whereas the subject matter of this investigation, Mr. Chair, is the utilization of the confidential fund. These are two different matters, Mr. Chair. And third, Mr. Chair, let us be aware of the jurisprudence on the case of Romero II versus Estrada. This is GR number 174105, promulgated on April 2, 2009, which essentially states ongoing judicial proceedings cannot preclude or hinder congressional hearings in aid of legislation. In this case, it was held that the mere filing of a criminal or an administrative complaint before a court should not automatically bar the conduct of legislative investigation. Otherwise, Mr. Chair, it would be extremely easy to subvert any intended inquiry by Congress through the convenient ploy of instituting a criminal or an administrative complaint. Surely, the exercise of sovereign legislative authority, of which the power of legislative inquiry is an essential component, cannot be made subordinate to a criminal or administrative investigation. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, there is no leg to stand on where the OVP can raise the rule on sub judice. I submit, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luistro. Meron pa pong gusto mag-comment? Yes, Congressman Defensor, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to put to rest once and for all the issue of whether this is in aid of legislation. This is clearly in aid of legislation because ang pera na ginamit ng OVP at ng DepEd is funded and forms part of the single most important legislation passed by Congress every year, and that is the annual budget or the General Appropriations Act. Walang pwedeng magsabi na ang pondo na binibigay sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno kapag iniimbestigahan ng committee ito is not part of in aid of legislation because we legislate the funds that we give to all agencies and instrumentalities of government. And it is for us to determine through our oversight and this committee whether we will fund it again, whether we will repeal it, or whether we will not no longer fund these programs through these confidential and intelligence funds. So I hope that is clear to every Filipino na in aid of legislation ito kasi part ito ng annual budget or General Appropriations Act taon-taon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Congressman Abante, you're recognized.
I fully agree with Congresswoman Luistro and Congressman Defensor on what they said. Ito po ay pinapanood ng taong bayan na kinakailangan maunawaan po nila na itong pondong ito, whether confidential po ito o hindi, nagastos na po ito. Hindi pa ito gagastusin, nagastos na ho ito eh. Ang nais nating malaman kung paano ito nagastos. Tungkulin po natin yan sa committee ito na alamin upang malaman po ng taong bayan na yung paggastos po ng pondo na nanggaling sa mga taxpayers ay tama at naaayon sa mandato na ibinigay sa office ng pangalawang. Kaya nga po iniimbitahan natin itong mga taong ito na nakakaalam ng mga pondong ito. Ako naman po medyo naaawa na rin sa ating members ng COE na naririndi na sa mga katanungan natin. Talagang dapat pumunta na po ito. Kaya gusto ko rin i-air ang warning na ito muli. Pag hindi pa sila nagpunta, sa panglimang pagkakataon, ako na po ay magmo-motion to issue a contempt order on them. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Your
Congressman
Honor.
Abante.
May I be recognized?
Yes, Comsec, you're recognized.
Thank you, Your Honor. We recognize the presence of Honorable Ernesto M. Jonicio Jr., Member, 1st District of the City of Manila, as well as Honorable Jonathan Keith T. Flores, 2nd District of Bukidnon. Your Honor, present as well today are representatives from the Land Bank of the Philippines, AVP Nanita Camposano of the DOTC branch. Ma'am, may you please raise your hand? Present, Your Honor. DM Joyce L. Eclavea, DepEd branch. And Attorney Rafael Christopher L. Yap, Special Legal Concerns Department. Present, Your Honor. That's it.
Nakapag-take na po ba sila ng oath?
No, Your Honor, they are new invitees, Your Honor.
Yes, pwede po bang paki-administer yung oath, Comsec?
From the representatives of the Land Bank, kindly stand up. Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this inquiry? So help you God. Thank you, Your Honor. The oath has been administered.
Thank you. We will now proceed to our next item in the agenda, the continuation of the deliberation. We will first call on the first interpellator, the Honorable Congressman Rog Gutierrez. Yes, you are first to interpellate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yung mga gusto pong, for a while, Congressman, yung mga gusto pa pong Congressman na magpalista lang po, lumapit lang po kay Comsec. Thank you po. Please continue, Congressman Rog.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just have a few questions based on the ARs that we've done. And given that this is already our 4th hearing, I'm sure COA is very much used to our questioning, and I hope they could indulge us some more. Actually, Mr. Chair, yung aking mga katanungan is supposedly directed to the Special Disbursement Officer of the OVP, because under my understanding, based on the joint memo, this would have been SDO Acosta's responsibility, because under number 6.3.2, Section B, it is part of the Special Disbursing Officer's responsibility to maintain separate records of all transactions and to retain a certified copy or duplicate copy of the required supporting documents and reports on utilization. However, and my questioning is precisely on this, on the acknowledgement receipts attached as justification, yung documentary evidence presented. However, given that the SDO Acosta is not around, I guess we'll be forced to at least to get this some of the answers I'll be forced to ask the COA. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to direct my questions perhaps to Attorney Camora from the ICFAO, if they would be so kind to indulge. Just as to add context po, no, Attorney Camora. We know po that the confidential funds are special in the sense that they respond to, they pertain to a certain purpose only allowable under the Joint Memo Circular. But this does not mean that this is a blank check po, no? It's not a blanket authority that it could be spent without justification. Would that be a fair statement po?
Attorney Camora, you're recognized.
That is correct po, Your Chair.
So,
Mr. Chair.
in line with that and in line with the requirements of the COA, you would ask actually for liquidation reports. Although it's special in the sense that it is directed only to the chairman of the COA, you still have the ICFAO to study this. And in fact, it is the ICFAO who gives the AOMs, the notice of disallowance, and the notice of credit in relation to confidential fund spending. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
That is correct, Mr.
Thanks,
Chair.
So, Mr. Chair, given the, maybe no, I have a timeline again of the 2022 confidential fund usage of the OVP. If I understand correctly, it was disbursed within 11 days. This was for December of 2022, and the basis of the funds was a transfer from the contingent fund. But there was an AOM issued by your office. Anong date po nito?
Mr. Chair, the first AOM is dated September 14, 2023.
So for the 2022 confidential funds, September 2023 yung AOM. And the response by the Office of the Vice President was received around what time po kaya?
It was received by the ICFAO on October 19, 2023, Mr. Chair.
October 2023. And there was insufficient the DEPs po, no? And this would be pertaining to, in support of the liquidation reports, yung ating mga acknowledgement receipts. Whereas compared to usual spending by government wherein we actually need official receipts, kapag ang pinag-uusapan po ay confidential or intelligence funds, because precisely confidential dapat yung usage nito, it is sufficient to submit acknowledgement receipts. Tama po ba?
Mr. Chair, since the requirement is documentary evidence of payment, not necessarily official receipt.
Correct.
So they could submit acknowledgement
Attorney Camora,
receipts.
pwede pong pakilakasan po ninyo yung boses ninyo.
Documentary evidence of payment po ang required sa joint circular. So the acknowledgement receipts are acceptable po.
Acceptable. Correct po, no? And I agree with that. So the acknowledgement receipts are acceptable. However, one of the findings of the AOM was kulang nga po yung DEPs. And this is pertaining to the acknowledgement receipts.
The first time na nag-liquidate po sila, wala po talagang submitted na DEPs.
Opo. So that's why you had the AOMs in September 2023. Part of the findings was the lack of the DEPs, precisely yung mga ARs natin. And then they answered in October 2023. When they filed in October 2023, was it already there, yung DEPs? Yung justification po nila?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it was part of their compliance.
So it was submitted October 2023. After that, there was a notice of disallowance pertaining to that quarter. Kailan po ito na-issue?
Mr. Chair, before that, a notice of suspension was issued. So normally, after the AOM is issued and the COA is not satisfied with the compliance, we issue a notice of suspension, which was issued on December 13, 2023.
December 2023. And the notice of suspension you mentioned is when the COA is not satisfied. So yung pagsubmit po ng October 2023 DEPs, hindi pa po satisfied yung COA. And what was the reason that you were not satisfied? Mali-mali po ba yung mga AR or kulang pa po yung mga AR?
May mga ibang ARs po na may issues and may kulang pa po na additional documentation on other ARs.
And after the notice of suspension for December 2023, they were given another chance to submit additional documents. Is that correct? Or wala na po?
Meron pa, Mr. Chair.
Meron pa.
They were given 90 days.
90 days.
To,
When did they, apologies, when did they submit their additional DEPs po? In response to the notice of suspension?
Mr. Chair, we received their compliance on March 13, 2024.
March 2024. And finally, I suppose after this, ito na po yung disallowance?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Anong date po ng disallowance po natin?
The disallowance is dated August 8, 2024, Mr. Chair.
August 2024. Thank you. I'll get back to that po. No? I wanted to establish a timeline because one of the things that we have found with the acknowledgement receipts is that there seemed to be a disconnect in relation to the dates, especially considering the fourth quarter of 2022 CF. Mr. Chair, maybe ask the Secretariat. I don't know if they've prepared it. I want to flash on screen an acknowledgement receipt. Here. Is the date legible po sa inyo? Can you see? I'd like to confirm that the date that it says is actually December 28, 2023. Do you see that, Attorney Camora?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And supposedly this was attached. I'm not sure if this would come in for the first batch of response in December 2023 or if it came in with the second batch of response in March 2024. But this is supposedly a DEP presented for the fourth quarter of 2022. Isn't it strange? Not really strange, it's outright false for it to justify an expense in 2022, but the date is 2023. Would that be correct, Ms. Camora? Attorney Camora?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. Actually, one of the findings under the notice of suspension is that some of the acknowledgements were dated December 2023. and some were even undated.
Yes. And this would be the basis for disallowance? Or was this, ano po yung, this was the findings of the AOM po, no?
Yes, that is under the notice of suspension na po,
The
Mr. Chair.
suspension.
Since nakapag-comply na sila, so yung observation namin was already under the notice of suspension po.
How would it be complied po, Attorney Camora? How did they rectify the AR? If it, I mean, my understanding po is pag submitted po yung AR, this is already supposedly presumed to be regular, and then you have an outright problem such as 2023. Although you might say na typographical error, but correct me if I'm wrong, this happens more than once po. Is that correct, Attorney Camora?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Would you know how many ARs exactly yung dated 2023, submitted for 2022?
Mr. Chair, we have attached it in the original notice of suspension. However, we do not have the figures today.
Sige po. Well, just to help you po, no, based on our study, 158 of the acknowledgement receipts have that typographical error. We would understand the typographical error if it happens once or twice, and at most for one individual to make that mistake multiple times. But for supposedly acknowledgement receipts which come from different sources, this should be different people issuing it po, diba? These are different people signing off for different expenses. Now, for 158 people to make the same mistake, is that something that would be acceptable? Is that an acceptable margin of error for the COA?
Mr. Chair, they answered in their compliance. As to the
Mr. Chair, apologies. Maybe you know what does it mean to answer with the compliance? So they took back yung AR na mali po yung date, or
no, Mr. Chair, yung compliance nila contained their answers why they had the acknowledgement receipts dated December 2023 and undated acknowledgement receipts.
and what was the answer po, Attorney Camora?
They said they have inadvertently contained clerical or typographical errors indicating 2023 instead of 2022. Considering the nature of confidential activities which are usually conducted discreetly and completed within a short period of time, and in addition to the lack of attention to details of personnel attending to voluminous papers from several individuals, some data in the acknowledgement receipts submitted as proof of transactions may have been missed.
Mr. Chair, I apologies. I think that portion would suffice po, Attorney Camora. No? So the answer of compliance, they did not dispute, they did not take back the ARs, but they simply gave that defense that it was an inadvertence, or basically typo nga po siya. But precisely the point, Mr. Chair, that I think that the committee should consider is that it's a typographical error for 158 acknowledgement receipts. This is not something that I think, although we do not argue with the COA, of course, this is their jurisdiction. It is precisely their decision if that compliance would be sufficient. However, I think for us to consider in strengthening the laws that we are going to craft, in support perhaps of the joint memorandum circular, I think we have to be stricter with the acknowledged receipts to be issued. Because, Mr. Chair, I would like to propose one thing. Of course, the COA will not be able to answer this. But given the timeline po, no, September 2023 yung first na AOM, the October 2023 was the compliance with the first batch of ARs, and then December 2023, the notice of suspension. And that was the time siguro po, no, that they were coming up with these new ARs. It would make more sense, Mr. Chair, for them to make that mistake. Because when pag nagkaka-typographical error po natin sa date, the usual mistake is you put on the date that is current. Isn't it possible, Mr. Chair, based on human experience, isn't it more likely that these ARs were prepared a year after the fact already? That they were prepared in December 2023, because this precisely coincides with the date in which they submitted the second batch of the ARs. I don't think, Mr. Chair, this was a mistake that was committed in December 2022. This was a mistake that was committed after the fact, after the AOM, and after the notice of suspension, when they were rushing to comply with yung mga butas po na lahat ng COA. I think this is something that the committee should consider. especially when it comes to the compliance with the COA. We are not faulting the COA, of course, and we respect them. This is their jurisdiction. But one thing that we understand that we see from the COA is that generally they are not really ministerial, but they would err on the side of caution rather than put themselves in the place to, exercise discretion regarding the disbursements by any agency. Sa kanila po, as long as complied yung DEP, and as long as there's an explanation, they would accept it. However, I think the COA has to go above and beyond that requirement. Because, Mr. Chair, just to highlight also how spurious this seems and how bogus. If December 2022 po yung date dapat ng AR, tapos December 2023 yung date, it wouldn't even correspond to any confidential funds. It's not possible if ever the reasoning was nagkapalitan ng AR, because I understand that might be one of the excuses for inadvertence. Baka nagkapalitan yung AR for December 23 and December 2022. Pero wala pong December 2023. If we recall, the fourth quarter of the confidential funds for the Office of the OVP was never dispersed. They chose, although it was already included in the our General Appropriations Act, they chose not to disperse yung fourth quarter. So saan po na ilalagay itong December 2023 AR if, in fact, they would say inadvertence, nagkapalitan yan, or if they say typographical error naman, it wouldn't make sense. What's that doing in December 2022? 158 times po nangyari. More likely, this was the same mistake committed by perhaps a few persons.